Welcome back to the basement, boys and girls. Sugar Pants back at it with more of the sleazes that pleases. Today's tawdry tale is 1995's Castle Freak, an extra greasy, sleazy, cheesy slice of celluloid about a troubled family who inherits a castle and all the rotten history it contains. It's a movie co-written and directed by Stuart Gordon, so there's a pretty serious chance it's incredibly loosely based off of Lovecraft. Yep, Lovecraft. And before we do the sleaze docket, I'm just gonna say that I hope you like monster genitals, because this movie is like 10 pounds of nuts in a 5-pound bag.
That's a lot of nuts!
Hey, I've got certain standards to maintain around these parts, and if that means mutant scrotum, then so be it. That being said, let's get to that sleaze docket proper to find out all the bits and bobs this movie's thrusting into your faces. We have 7 dead bodies, 12 cups blood, 2 naked breasts, 1 naked butt, 1 naked bajingo, 1 naked dong, a first for the show. 1 naked nugget pouch, another first for the show. Freak flogging, psychotic fiddle playing, glass shards to the eye, glass to the palm, harbinger of impending doom cliche, cat jump scare cliche, 1 partially eaten cat, 1 self-administered thumbectomy, 1 nipple bitten off, carnivorous cunnilingus, shackle thrashing, chain strangulation, eyeball chewing, nightstick to the face, nightstick to the skull, knife to the spine, tethered suicide, and 1 assaulted scrotum. Our movie begins with the saddest brunch ever. Crusty bread, dried meat, and yet would probably still cost $47.99 at Panera Bread. Granny Hagatha lights a candle and takes a plate for a walk all the way into the depths of the castle. Hagatha opens a locked door, brings in a flail, and beats the shit out of something chained to the wall. The pitiful thing wails and sobs before she places the food inside. Then, the mean old bitch dies, and she's so unliked by the surrounding community, her corpse actually rots in the bed long before anyone finds her. You think I'm being mean? Don't worry, we find out more about her later on. Cue the title card and the spastic fiddling. Ooh, Barbara Crampton! I'm gonna have to pay special attention to this one. After 2 minutes and 10 seconds of Charlie Daniels having a seizure, we finally get past the credits. Starting with an iris out transition, nope, we're driving through a tunnel. Here we see Giannetti driving the Riley family through the Italian countryside. Susan complains that he's driving too fast, and young Rebecca asks what the castle looks like. No character development or anything, just smash us over the heads immediately with the fact that she's blind. She rolls the window down to breathe in the air, and the overly protective mother immediately rolls it back up. You know, because she's blind. She might fall out of the window. John tells Giannetti that when he first got the letter telling him he had inherited a castle, he thought it was a scam. The family then slowly wanders the property looking at the quaint yet under-maintained structure, while Giannetti explains the family history. John is the nephew of the previous owner, the Duchess, and the castle is the last remains of the estate as the family fortune was lost during the war. John asks how soon the estate can be liquidated. Giannetti doesn't say how long that can take, as the property value is impossible to determine since the late Duchess was the only person to live on the property for the past 40 years. In one of the bedrooms, the family is introduced to Giannetti's sister, Agnessi, who is tasked with cooking and cleaning during the family stay. Giannetti takes his leave, and Agnessi tells the family this is the master bedroom. Susan asks if Agnessi can prepare a separate room for John. Oh, man! Married to Barbara Crampton and she makes you sleep in another room? This is a horror movie! Skip ahead a short bit, and John is visiting Susan in the master bedroom. She asks what he wants, and he says, since it's their first night in a new place, that it might be time for a fresh start. She says she was just about to fall asleep after taking a sleeping pill. John gets all sappy and romantic, saying that he can wake Sleeping Beauty, as she's sleeping in his castle after all. Susan immediately shuts him down, and the two argue if she'll ever forgive him. Eventually, John leaves to go thrash around in his own bed. Sleepy time brings a flashback nightmare in which drunken John is driving the kids and crashes the car, killing the son and blinding the daughter. John suddenly wakes and gets up to wander the castle during the convenient lightning storm. He hears a distant wailing and follows the noise that sounds more and more like a crying child.
JJ?
Oh, come on, dude. I know you're still grieving, but your dead son is not wailing in the basement of a castle 8,000 miles away from where he died. Down in the lower levels, John finds a huge wine cellar full of dusty bottles. A moment of lip-licking contemplation before smashing the bottle and accidentally cutting his palm. While washing the blood off, Agnesi gives him a jump scare, but at least we didn't get a musical sting to accompany it. John asks if she heard the moaning noises, and she tells him the story of the castle's last owners. The Duchess was married to an American who abandoned her and her son, who later died at the age of 5. Soon after, the son was buried, and the Duchess dismissed everyone from the castle, living alone for 42 years. Apparently, the Duchess went crazy after her husband left, and some in town say that she was the one who killed her son in an act of revenge. John asks why she's telling him the story, and she says the town believes the castle is haunted, as others have heard the same child's cries at night. Becca is listening to her Italian lessons on tape and begins crying. Susan asks what's wrong, but she says nothing. Then John pops in to ask Becca to join him as he does an inventory of what they've got.
I'm going to start making an inventory of what we got here. The booty. You want to tag along, Beck? Get the lay of the land?
Overprotective mommy doesn't think it's a good idea. Jesus, even going for a walk is too much to trust? Becca and John find a nursery full of old toys, and then the Duchess's bedroom, complete with horrific art.
Right there. While I look around for booty.
Stop saying booty to your daughter! Or at the very least, stop saying it like you were Ron Jeremy. John glances under the bed and finds the Duchess's flail, and he's immediately disgusted by it. Moving over to the wardrobe, he finds a photo album full of pictures of 2 young ladies and 1 torn photograph of a soldier. Becca asks if John hears any scratching, but he's too busy to listen to her. She begins to follow the noise until she finds a cat jump scare. She then follows the kitty down to the cellar. John finally realizes his daughter is no longer in the room and runs to find her. The cat leads Becca all the way to the dungeon, where she trips over absolutely nothing. I mean, she just wandered through the entire castle, only gently bumping into closed doors, but a slight decline sends her head over heels? She turns around to leave, but hears a tiny groan that makes her turn back towards the dungeon. The cat runs inside the hatch, while Becca calls out for whomever made the noise. But whatever is inside the cell wakes up. John calls out for Becca, and she makes her way upstairs. Unfortunately, the cat isn't so lucky. Back upstairs, Mom grabs Becca without announcing her presence, which just has to be the worst way of greeting a blind person. She notices her skinned knee and lets John have it for being so careless. John screams back that they can't watch her every second, but Susan disagrees. Finally, Becca shouts over them that there's someone else in the castle. Downstairs, whatever is in the cell is suddenly reinvigorated over his kitty cat meal and starts pulling against its chains. It chews through its own thumb and then breaks it off to slip off the shackles, screaming in agony until it triumphantly shouts over its newfound freedom. Hang on. So Dad hears the freak's moans during a thunderstorm, but nobody hears the victorious wailing he does as he frees himself from a life of bondage on a quiet, sunny afternoon? Susan is shaming her daughter for the crime of being curious, until Becca reminds her that it's her handicap. And she again insists that someone else is in the castle, but Susan finally tells her enough. Meanwhile, the creature is smashing through the cell door. Apparently, cat meat is like Popeye's spinach to this thing. Slowly, it climbs the stairs, blinded by the sudden appearance of natural light. It catches a glimpse of itself in a mirror and smashes the glass. Oh, that the family fucking heard, huh? John and Susan check it out and just pass it off as warped wood or temperature change. Becca again insists that there's someone else roaming around. Cut to that night, and the freak finds his way into Becca's bedroom. He slowly pulls the bed sheets and blankets from her, but the noise of his shackles wakes her up and she screams. John goes looking for whatever caused the disturbance and finds himself in a room full of sheet-covered furniture. John heads downstairs and finds the creature's cell. He looks inside, but misses the dead, partially eaten cat. Eventually, he finds the catacombs and all the burial plots inside. One for Giorgio catches his eye thanks to the photograph attached to the stone. The creature slinks inside just as John calls out, JJ, thinking the photo looks just like his own son. The sound of a clinking chain spins him around, but the creature is pretty good at hiding. John sobs over the photograph for a bit. The next day, the family calls the police about a possible trespasser, but the cops are having trouble understanding the story. John insists they do an inspection, but Officer Forte says they can't spare the manpower without any real evidence. After the officers leave, John leads Susan down to the catacombs to show her the picture of Giorgio, but it's missing. He insists it looks exactly like their son, but Susan doesn't believe him. Finally, Susan shows a little bit of sensitivity until John tries to kiss her and she shoves him away. She tells him that he always tries to pretend that nothing is his fault. It's his father's fault he's an alcoholic. The university was at fault for firing him because he was politically incorrect. She then just lays it all out. It was he who was driving the car drunk. He blinded Becky and killed their son. She finally says she wishes it was he who died instead, and John storms off to the highest tower. He climbs up onto the ledge, but slowly steps back down. Later, he finds himself at a bar for a double shot of Jack Daniel's product placement. John mulls over his drink for a while, then slams it down in one gulp before ordering another. Outside, the church bells toll, and we see that the bar has become a happening place. How long has he been here? An obvious prostitute comes up and asks for a light, but John buys her a drink instead. He orders another whiskey for himself, but the bartender just shows him the empty bottle. Too drunk to understand, he accidentally knocks over the lady's glass of wine. Officer Forte shows up and translates the message, saying the bartender is closing the bar. John glances around at the crowd and replies that it's only closing for him. Forte suggests John go home to his family, and the lady chastises him in Italian or whatever. John then realizes he still owes the lady a glass of wine and takes her back to his newly acquired wine cellar. The lady gets all suggestive with the bottle, and it's not long before John's pushing her up against the stone wall. Unfortunately, there's an audience who's got his own repression to work through. The creature gets all sorts of brand new ideas over the 98-second show. After the deed, John gets his post-nut conscience back, and the lady hits him with the bill. He pays her and crumples into the corner with his wine and passes out. The creature takes the bottle and scurries off. The lady dribbles her way back upstairs and finds herself in the cloth-draped room where she's attacked. Next morning, Officer Forte comes for a visit to say that the lady never made it home and that the last time anyone saw her was when she was entering the castle with John. Forte asks if he can look around, and John reminds him of how yesterday they couldn't be bothered. John is asked to go down to the station to answer some questions, but he refuses until he talks to his lawyer and slams the door. Susan slaps him across the face at the mere suggestion that he brought another woman to the castle. Down in the cellar, the lady wakes up to find that she's been shackled to a spooky ghost. The creature takes a drink of the wine and offers her some, clearly trying to recreate the events that he saw last night. He paws her hair and goes in for a kiss. The lady grabs the bottle, breaks it, and slashes him across the arm. Angrily, the creature begins tearing her clothes off and bites her nipple off.
Did not bite it, bit it off. OFF off, bit it off.
That is a new kind of hurt right there.
Again, nobody hears the screams of incredible pain from the basement? Susan is packing her bags, but Becca insists that if her dad is drinking again, then he needs them more than ever. Back at the bar, John is meeting with Gianetti about the missing prostitute. He says that if it really is the way he tells it, then John will be innocent, as there's no evidence against him. He then says that the prostitute and Forte were lovers and have a child together, though the officer denies it. The bartender tells Gianetti that he's got a phone call. It's Agnesi telling him that she found the prostitute's handbag at the castle. He tells John about it and that it's enough evidence for the police to make an arrest. John begins to panic, but Gianetti says that he will have Agnesi bring the handbag to him until the police find the prostitute, which means all that's left is the two of them discussing a new financial agreement. John asks what he means, and Gianetti says with these new problems with his case, he'll have to raise his fee. John calls it blackmail, and Gianetti doesn't disagree with him. John calls Gianetti a bastard, and he, in turn, tells some more details of the family's history. Apparently, the Duchess's husband didn't just leave her, he ran off to America with the Duchess's younger sister. But since the Duchess wouldn't grant a divorce, John's parents were never legally married. Gianetti then takes great delight in telling John that he is, in actuality, the bastard here. Agnesi goes to take care of the handbag when she hears a horrible scream come from the basement. Oh, now somebody can fucking hear what's going on down there, huh? And what's the creature doing? He's doing what he thought he saw John do last night. Unfortunately, this time around, there's a lot more teeth going on, if you catch my drift. Agnesi finds the bloody and partially devoured prostitute and tries to tend to her, but the creature sneaks up from behind and beats her to death with his chains. And the basement's soundproof qualities have returned because no one upstairs hears any of this. Susan is putting her bags and Becca into a taxi when John comes running up the driveway. She says she's leaving, and John tells her he's going to be arrested, and if she leaves, it'll look like he's guilty. She replies by saying she should have left him 2 years ago and gets in the cab. John begs her not to leave, but Susan says he made himself into a whipping boy. Saying that phrase makes John remember the flail he found under the Duchess's bed. As the taxi begins to leave, it's stopped by the entire police force who tell Susan her husband will be arrested, and they'll have to search the castle. Susan says that's all fine, but she and her daughter will be taking the train to Rome. Forte then says they can't leave as they both will be required to issue statements to the police. John grabs a shovel and takes it down to the catacombs to smash open Giorgio's coffin to find it empty. He tells the police that Giorgio's been kept alive this whole time and the Duchess has been punishing him for his father leaving. The police handcuff John and begin to take him away when they find the bodies of both the prostitute and Agnesi. The police post guards outside of Susan and Becca's rooms before taking John to the station. Susan asks for some water, and one officer goes alone to the kitchen where he's taken out by Giorgio. You know, for someone that's been chained up basically his whole life, it's amazing how fast he's gone all Assassin's Creed up in here. At the police station, John is being questioned, but he insists his family must be moved for their safety. Naturally, Forte doesn't believe him. After the first guard doesn't come back, the second guard goes looking for him and finds a sheet-covered body, and checking on it without his gun or nightstick costs him an eyeball. Becca asks her mom if she thinks Dad is a murderer, and Susan says she believes he killed their son. The two pray for safety, and the creature watches them from the doorway. Becca says she's getting a headache, and Susan wonders what's taking her water request so long to fill. Then Becca talks about how she doesn't care if things in their family ever get back to normal, because then she doesn't have to worry about stupid stuff like cars and prom. Like, what does that even mean? I'm pretty sure blind people are allowed to go to prom. Well, maybe not in Tennessee, I don't know. Susan heads down the hallway just as the lightning knocks out the power, and Giorgio knocks out Susan. Becca's getting ready for bed when Giorgio comes in to sniff her clothes and carry her away. Susan comes to just in time to see her daughter being taken away and grabs a knife from the kitchen. That's when she notices soot coming from the chimney just as the dead body of one of the officers falls to the ground. Amazing timing, gravity. Back at the police station, John is demanding they go save his family. But Captain Dickhead is going all Italian Gestapo power trip douchebag, demanding to know why John killed the prostitute.
I didn't kill her, I fucked her, okay?
Ooh, that was definitely worth the cracked skull. John slowly gets up, arms himself with the police baton, and makes his escape out the convenient open window. Down in the basement, Giorgio shackles himself to Becca and tries to show her the photograph of him as a child. Realizing she's blind, he takes off the sheet and we finally see how 40 years of torture and abuse has twisted his body. He starts taking off her bra, but Susan distracts him by taking off her own clothes and telling him to take her instead. When he takes her up on the offer, she stabs him in the back with the kitchen knife. Susan unshackles Becca and the two run back upstairs. Once outside to ground level, Giorgio jumps out of a second-story window for some fucking reason. I guess he ran up 2 flights of stairs in the time the ladies ran up 1? Pretty impressive for a twisted human with a knife spine. The horribly naked Giorgio chases the two back inside, twigs and berries just flapping in the cool night air. He chases them into the Duchess's bedroom where he finds Mama's flail. He starts swinging it around the room, breaking up the wardrobe where Susan and Becca are hiding. Eventually, he tires himself out and leaves. Susan leads Becca down the hallway where she knocks over a vase, alerting Giorgio to their location. So naturally, the two run upstairs to the roof. But right when he's got them cornered, John shows up to fight. Giorgio with his flail and chains, John with his club. It's quite primal, really. John gets knocked to the other side of the roof, and Giorgio tries to strangle him, but then comes an airstrike to the nugget pouch. John slams Giorgio's head into the roof a few times and temporarily knocks him out, but he comes back to start whipping the shit out of John. Giorgio heads back to the ladies, but John grabs Giorgio's chains and jumps off the roof! Oh sure, he just fell several stories to land on the textured stone, move his head around a lot. John apologizes, confesses his love for Susan, and then dies. Jump to sometime in the near future and we see Susan and Becca in their mourning clothes as local villagers carry John's coffin to the hearse. At the end of the drive, we see Forte standing with his illegitimate child, and the credits roll. Ugh, I kind of feel like I need a loofah scrub after this one. There's an awful lot of nasty going on. For instance, the fact that our quote-unquote monster was an innocent child tortured for 40 years by a psychotic bitch mother. I can't even imagine what kind of hell that must be to spend your entire life in a cramped cell. And the fact that the Duchess kept feeding Giorgio just to keep him alive in order to prolong his torture? I mean, my God, how deranged do you have to be? And even when the bitch dies, there's no release from his prison. He's left to starve to death in his cell while she reaches the later stages of decomposition upstairs. But let's go further into this mess. For 40 years, the only human contact Giorgio got was his torturer. I mean, from a philosophical angle, which is worse? Being tortured by the only human being you know, or having zero contact with another human being? Which brings me to a brand new segment I hope to work in as often as possible. Douchey philosophical debate that no one asked for. This movie has an underlying theme of not forgiving those around you. The movie's whole conflict starts with a dejected wife punishing an innocent child for decades because of her hatred of her husband. This inability for her to move on not only consumes her own life, but the life of her own child. Imagine the hatred one must have to destroy your own flesh and blood simply because they carry the genes of someone you despise. Now, consider the Riley family. Susan is so incapable of forgiving the sins of her husband that it begins to emotionally affect Rebecca. Now, of course, John's sin of driving drunk and killing their son and blinding their daughter is arguably a much harder sin to forgive than the Duchess's husband leaving her for her sister. But still, Susan's hatred and inability to forgive is all-consuming, and even the kind words of her own daughter cannot get through. Unfortunately, the only act that even begins to break through this wall she has constructed is John's sacrifice in saving the remaining members of his family. Unlike his father, he didn't abandon them when they needed him. And let's not forget Forte's own family issues, having an illegitimate child with the town's prostitute that he won't even acknowledge until the end of the movie. Hopefully, John's sacrifice has broken the curse of unforgiveness for all of those connected to the Duchess and her husband. This is definitely one of those movies that just gets more gruesome the deeper you dig into it. Castle Freak was co-written and directed by Stuart Gordon, whom many horror fans know from his other director credits: Reanimator, Dolls, Robot Jox, Dagon, 2 episodes of Masters of Horror, and one of my personal favorite movies, From Beyond. Sadly, Stuart passed away quite recently on March 24th, 2020. He is definitely one of the reasons I grew up with a love of horror movies. Sneaking out of bed and staying up well past my bedtime to watch Reanimator and From Beyond are some of my more vivid horror memories from my childhood. Thank you for the nightmares, good sir. Our tortured father was played by Jeffrey Combs, who is also no stranger to horror fans, or Stuart Gordon Productions for that matter. The Man with Two Brains, Reanimator, From Beyond, Cellar Dweller, 1 episode of Freddy's Nightmares, Robot Jox, Bride of Reanimator, The Frighteners, The New Batman Adventures, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, 32 episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, House on Haunted Hill, Beyond Reanimator, and Justice League Unlimited, just to name a few of his 140 acting credits. The lovely Barbara Crampton played our icy, unforgiving wife Susan, and is also quite iconic in the world of horror and schlock. 83 episodes of Days of Our Lives, Reanimator, Chopping Mall, From Beyond, Puppet Master, 38 episodes of Guiding Light, 287 episodes of The Bold and the Beautiful, 153 episodes of The Young and the Restless, The Lords of Salem, and she's still adding to her credits to this day, including the recent fan favorite, Jacob's Wife. Well, that wraps up this festering foray into the basement bile, but there's no end of putrid pestilence plodding our way, so until I greet you again, this is your old pal Sugar Pants. See you in your dreams.
The Duchess will never give him a divorce. She's nobility. So, the marriage of your father with her sister was not legal, no good.
No!
Yes. Your father was never married to your mother. So you, Giovanni, are the bastard.